The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Buckingham Palace as Officer Harrison adjusted his bearskin cap. At just 25, he had already earned his place among the alert Royal Guards, a testament to his unwavering dedication and exceptional service record. The crisp summer breeze carried the excited chatter of tourists gathering around the palace gates. Harrison maintained his legendary stillness, a skill perfected through countless hours of training. His polished buttons gleamed in the sunlight, each one reflecting his pride in wearing the famous scarlet tunic. As more visitors arrived, Harrison could hear snippets of different languages mixing in the air. A group of schoolchildren pressed their faces against the iron railings, pointing and whispering about his impressive height and perfect posture. Their teacher explained the rich history of the Royal Guards, making Harrison smile internally at their genuine fascination. 5 years had passed since he first put on the uniform, but the honor never faded. He remembered his grandmother's tears of joy at his graduation ceremony and how she'd framed his first official photo in her living room. Being one of the few black guardsmen only made him stand taller, knowing he was helping change perceptions one duty shift at a time. The summer heat was building, but Harrison remained motionless, his discipline unwavering. He'd learned to find peace in these long stands, using the time to reflect on his journey. From his childhood dreams of serving in the military to the grueling training at Catterick Garrison, every step had led him here. Tourists continued streaming in, their cameras clicking away. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking if the guard was a statue. Harrison fought back an amused smile. It wasn't the first time someone had wondered that. The boy's innocent question reminded him of his own childhood fascination with the Royal Guards. Through the corner of his eye, Harrison noticed the regular morning crowd growing larger than usual. Travel season was hitting its peak, bringing visitors from every corner of the globe. Some tried the familiar tactics to make him break his stance. Funny faces, jokes, even dancing, but his training held firm. Each perfectly executed movement of his drill routine drew gasps of admiration from the crowd. The precision of his steps, the sharp angle of his rifle, the exact timing of his turns, all reflected the centuries of tradition he now helped preserve. Yet beneath the ceremonial duties lay a highly trained soldier, ready to protect the crown at a moment's notice. As the morning wore on, Harrison spotted familiar faces among the palace staff heading to their posts. A subtle nod from the head groundskeeper, a quick smile from the administrative assistant, small acknowledgments of the mutual respect they shared. These simple gestures reminded him that he wasn't just standing guard. He was part of a living, breathing institution. The clock struck 10, bringing a fresh wave of visitors. Harrison adjusted his grip on his rifle, preparing for another busy day of representing the finest traditions of British military service. Little did he know that this ordinary summer morning was about to take an extraordinary turn, testing not just his training, but his character in ways he never expected. The peaceful morning atmosphere shifted as a loud voice cut through the tourist chatter. A middle-aged man, wearing an expensive camera around his neck and designer sunglasses, pushed his way through the crowd. His face was flushed from what seemed to be a mix of the summer heat and one too many early afternoon drinks at a nearby pub. The tourist's presence immediately created an uncomfortable ripple through the gathered onlookers. He held his camera up, taking photos while making increasingly unwelcome comments about Officer Harrison's presence at such a historic post. His words, that initially muttered under his breath, grew louder with each passing minute. Other visitors began exchanging worried glances. A family from Japan quietly moved their children away, while an elderly British couple shook their heads in disapproval. The tourist's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore, his prejudiced remarks echoing off the palace walls. His expensive clothes and confident swagger suggested someone used to getting his way, someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. Two teenagers lowered their selfie sticks and pulled out their phones, sensing the situation might need documenting. The tourist noticed this but seemed encouraged rather than deterred by the attention. He started performing for the cameras, making exaggerated gestures while spouting outdated views that had no place in modern society. Officer Harrison maintained his professional composure, staring straight ahead as his training demanded. His eyes remained fixed on a distant point, though the muscles in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Years of military discipline served him well in this moment, helping him stand firm against the growing hostility. The tourist's voice grew louder still, his words slurring slightly as he began a misguided history lesson to anyone within earshot. He waved his arms dramatically, claiming things had changed too much and that traditions were being ruined. Several people in the crowd started recording on their phones, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust at his behavior. A young woman in the crowd tried to intervene, telling the tourist his comments were inappropriate and unwelcome. This only seemed to fuel his anger. He turned his attention back to Harrison, his camera now forgotten as he focused entirely on trying to provoke a reaction from the stoic guardsman. The summer air grew thick with tension as other tourists backed away, creating a small circle around the increasingly agitated man. Two palace security officers in the distance noticed the commotion and began making their way toward the scene. The tourist, however, was too caught up in his performance to notice their approach. His designer shoes scraped against the gravel as he took another step forward, his face reddening further with each passing moment. The previously peaceful tourist spot had transformed into an uncomfortable theater, with the unwitting officer Harrison forced to stand center stage. As the situation escalated, more phones emerged from the crowd, their cameras capturing every moment. The tourist's behavior was becoming a perfect example of everything wrong with prejudice in the modern world, while Harrison's composed response would soon become a masterclass in professional dignity. The situation took a dramatic turn as the tourist's behavior crossed from merely offensive into potentially dangerous territory. His expensive watch glinted in the sunlight as he gestured wildly, his voice now loud enough to draw attention from visitors at the far end of the palace grounds. The crowd had grown significantly, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. A street performer who regularly worked the tourist spot outside the palace gates stopped his act mid-juggle, sensing the growing tension. He quietly began moving through the crowd, looking for palace security. The usual happy chatter of tourists had been replaced by an uneasy silence, broken only by the click of phone cameras and the tourists' increasingly hostile remarks. Two American visitors, both retired schoolteachers, whispered to each other about how different this was from their previous visits to the palace. They'd seen many attempts to provoke reactions from the guards before, silly dances, funny faces, even the occasional rude gesture, but this felt different. This had an edge of real danger to it. Officer Harrison remained motionless, but his training hadn't prepared him for this specific challenge. Each insult thrown his way carried the weight of centuries of prejudice, each word attempting to diminish not just his position, but his very humanity. Yet he stood firm, his dedication to duty unwavering, his dignity intact. The tourist, emboldened by the lack of immediate consequences, took another step forward. His designer shoes scuffed against the gravel as he moved closer to the barrier, the thin red rope that separated the public from the Queen's Guard. Other visitors backed away further, creating an unconscious circle around the unfolding drama. The air felt heavy with anticipation, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. A mother pulled her young son behind her, using her body as a shield while fumbling with her phone to record what was happening. The boy's ice cream cone dripped unnoticed onto the pavement, his wide eyes fixed on the scene before him. This wasn't the exciting palace visit his parents had promised. This was something else entirely. Through the crowd, two palace security officers could be seen speaking into their radios, their pace quickening as they approached. But they were still too far away to intervene immediately. The tourist seemed to sense his window of opportunity closing, and like many bullies cornered, he decided to escalate further. With a theatrical flourish that sent his designer sunglasses clattering to the ground, he gripped the barrier rope. The crowd collectively held its breath. Even the pigeons that usually pecked hopefully at tourist feet seemed to pause their scavenging, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Officer Harrison's peripheral vision caught a flash of movement as the tourist ducked under the rope. The ceremonial rifle in Harrison's hands, though unloaded, suddenly felt very real. Years of training coursed through his veins, not just military protocol, but the added weight of representing one of the world's most respected institutions. The summer air crackled with tension as phones recorded from every angle. What had started as a typical tourist day at Buckingham Palace had transformed into a moment that would soon go viral across social media platforms worldwide, becoming a testament to both humanity's capacity for prejudice and its ability to stand strong in the face of it. Time seemed to slow down as Officer Harrison's voice cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "Step back from the Queen's Guard." The command rang out across the courtyard, clear and authoritative, carrying the weight of centuries of tradition. It was the standard warning that every royal guard was trained to give, but in this moment it carried extra significance. The tourist froze momentarily, surprised by the sudden break in Harrison's silence. The guard's voice had a power to it that seemed to catch the troublemaker off guard. Several phones shifted position, their owners making sure to capture this crucial moment. A young student who had been sketching the palace quickly flipped to a new page, instinctively knowing she was witnessing something historic. The warning echoed off the palace walls, reaching the ears of approaching security personnel who quickened their pace. The tourist's face showed a flicker of uncertainty for the first time since his tirade began. Perhaps he hadn't expected the guard to speak at all, or maybe the command's authority had briefly pierced through his alcohol-fueled confidence. Two older palace visitors, who had seen the changing of the guard ceremony hundreds of times over the years, exchanged knowing looks. They'd witnessed countless tourists testing boundaries before, but never quite like this. The usual playful attempts to make guards smile were one thing. This deliberate provocation was something entirely different. Harrison's words hung in the air like summer thunder. His voice had carried the perfect blend of authority and restraint, reflecting years of training and discipline. Despite the pressure of the moment, despite the personal nature of the attacks he'd endured, his warning came out exactly as protocol demanded, no more, no less. The tourist's designer watch caught the sunlight as his hand wavered in midair. He seemed caught between retreat and advance, his alcohol-addled mind struggling to process the sudden shift in dynamics. The crowd held its collective breath, phones still recording, capturing every second of his indecision. A young couple who had been posing for wedding photos in the background slowly lowered their bouquet, their special day unexpectedly intersecting with this tense moment in history. The photographer quietly adjusted his lens, knowing these might become very different sorts of memorable photos. The warning had done what hundreds of similar warnings had done before. It had given the troublemaker a chance to step back, to reconsider, to choose a better path. But something in the tourist's bleary eyes suggested he wasn't done yet. His momentary hesitation began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of misplaced determination. The crowd watched as the tourist's face hardened again, his brief moment of uncertainty passing. His hand, which had paused in midair, began moving again, this time with clear intent toward Harrison's pristine uniform. The next few seconds would test not just Officer Harrison's training, but the very principles he'd sworn to uphold. Those closest to the scene could see Harrison's fingers adjust ever so slightly on his ceremonial rifle. His body remained perfectly still, but there was a new tension in his stance, the coiled readiness of a highly trained professional preparing to act. The next moment would determine whether the tourist would heed the warning or force a response that neither of them wanted, but one of them was prepared to deliver. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, studied in military training sessions, and discussed in countless news reports. Officer Harrison's response came with the precision of a Swiss watch, each movement exactly as his training had prepared him for, yet carrying a grace that no training manual could teach. The tourist's fingers were mere inches from Harrison's scarlet tunic when the guard executed his defense. The ceremonial rifle swept upward in a perfect arc, the polished wood and metal catching the sunlight. Harrison's body pivoted with mechanical precision, his boots grinding against the gravel in a movement practiced thousands of times during training. The crowd gasped collectively as Harrison completed his shoulder drill. The move was textbook perfect. A demonstration of control rather than aggression, of discipline rather than anger. His bearskin cap didn't even wobble as he moved, a testament to countless hours of practice. Every button on his uniform remained perfectly aligned, even as he shifted position. The tourist, unprepared for such a precise response, stumbled backward. His expensive shoes, better suited for business meetings than palace confrontations, offered little grip on the gravelly surface. His arms windmilled comically as he fought to keep his balance, his face transforming from aggressive confidence to sudden surprise. Time seemed to slow down as the tourist fell. Several people in the crowd winced, expecting a hard landing, but years of drinking in expensive bars had apparently taught him how to fall without serious injury. He landed more on his dignity than anything else, his designer clothes now covered in palace dust. A child's voice broke through the tension. "Mummy," the guard moved. The innocent observation drew nervous laughter from the crowd, breaking the spell of the moment. Phones captured every second, their owners knowing they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a guard doing his duty, but a man maintaining his dignity in the face of hatred. The palace grounds fell silent again as Harrison resumed his position with the same precision he'd shown in his defensive move. His face remained impassive, his eyes forward, his posture perfect. The only evidence of the confrontation was the thin layer of dust now settling on the tourist's clothing as he sat sprawled on the ground. Two palace security officers finally reached the scene, their faces showing both concern and professional restraint. They'd witnessed Harrison's textbook response from a distance, and their approach now was measured rather than urgent. They knew they weren't dealing with an emergency anymore, but rather the aftermath of a guard's perfect execution of his duties. The tourist's face had turned from red to pale, the alcohol in his system seemingly evaporating in an instant. The reality of his situation appeared to dawn on him as he noticed the sea of phone cameras pointed in his direction. His attempt to diminish one man's dignity had only succeeded in destroying his own. Looking back, witnesses would remember not the racist taunts or the attempted assault, but the absolute professionalism displayed by Officer Harrison. His response had been a masterclass in controlled force, enough to stop the threat, but not announce more. In that moment, he demonstrated not just the best traditions of the Royal Guard, but the triumph of dignity over discrimination. The aftermath unfolded with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed play. Two Metropolitan Police officers arrived within minutes, their blue lights reflecting off the palace gates. They moved with practiced calm, their presence adding another layer of authority to the scene. The tourist, still sitting in the gravel, had lost all traces of his previous bravado. Phones continued recording as the police officers helped the tourist to his feet. His designer clothes, now dusty and disheveled, made him look smaller somehow. The crowd watched in respectful silence as he was led away, his expensive camera dangling forgotten around his neck. His earlier words seemed to hang in the air like smoke, but they were now overshadowed by the dignity of Harrison's response. A palace staff member appeared with a clipboard, quietly collecting witness statements from the crowd. The young student who had been sketching earlier offered her drawings as evidence, her quick sketches capturing the sequence of events with surprising clarity. Others in the crowd stepped forward, eager to share their videos and photos, wanting to ensure the truth would be properly documented. The older couple who had witnessed hundreds of guard changes approached a police officer, their words measured and clear as they described what they'd seen. Their experience as longtime palace visitors added weight to their testimony. "In all our years," the gentleman said, adjusting his glasses, "we've never seen a guard act with more professionalism." News of the incident spread through social media like wildfire. The first video uploads were already gaining thousands of views, with comments pouring in from around the world. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag Royal Guard Professional, hashtag Dignity Wins, hashtag No Place for Hate. Each share and retweet carried a message about standing firm against prejudice. The summer breeze carried away the last echoes of the confrontation as normal tourist activities slowly resumed. A group of schoolchildren on a field trip arrived, their excited chatter helping to dispel the lingering tension. Their teacher used the moment as an impromptu lesson about respect and dignity, gesturing toward Officer Harrison, who continued his duty as if nothing had happened. Inside the palace, phones were ringing as news outlets sought official comments. The palace press office began crafting a statement, knowing this incident would require careful handling. They didn't need to spin the story. The videos spoke for themselves. Harrison's actions had already become a powerful symbol of grace under pressure. The tourist's expensive watch showed just 30 minutes had passed since his first inflammatory comment, but in that brief time, he'd managed to transform from an arrogant provocateur to a cautionary tale. Police officers conducted their preliminary interviews in a quiet corner of the grounds, their notepads filling with witness accounts that all told the same story. Palace security reviewed their CCTV footage, though they hardly needed to. Dozens of tourist videos captured every angle of the incident. Each recording showed the same thing: a guard performing his duty perfectly, responding to hatred with professional restraint. The tourists' attempts to provoke a scandal had backfired spectacularly. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds, the incident began to take on an almost mythical quality. Tourists who arrived later heard whispered accounts from those who had witnessed it. Officer Harrison's poised response had transformed what could have been an ugly scene into a powerful demonstration of dignity triumphing over discrimination. The incident at Buckingham Palace sparked conversations that reached far beyond the palace gates. By evening, news channels were running the story, their anchors discussing not just the confrontation but the larger issues it represented. The viral videos had struck a chord with people worldwide, turning a single guard's composed response into a powerful statement about dignity in the face of discrimination. Inside the palace, a special meeting was called. Senior officials gathered around a polished oak table, watching the various video clips that had flooded social media. The decision to release an official statement was unanimous. They recognized that this moment could serve as a turning point in how the public viewed the modernization of royal traditions. The royal household's statement was simple yet powerful. Today's incident demonstrates the exemplary conduct we expect from our guards. Officer Harrison's response reflects the professionalism, dignity, and diversity of modern Britain's finest institutions. The words spread quickly across news websites and social media platforms, adding official weight to the public's supportive reaction. Meanwhile, Officer Harrison's family gathered around their television, watching their son's story unfold on the evening news. His grandmother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, proud tears falling as commentators praised his composure. "That's my grandson," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The family's phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from proud relatives and supportive friends. The tourist's story took a different turn. His identity was quickly discovered through social media, leading to serious consequences in his professional life. His employer, an international company, released a statement distancing themselves from his actions and reinforcing their commitment to diversity and inclusion. The viral videos had turned his moment of prejudice into a lasting lesson about accountability. Local schools began requesting permission to use the incident videos in their citizenship classes. Teachers saw it as a perfect real-world example of how to respond to prejudice with dignity. One primary school teacher remarked, "It shows our students that sometimes the strongest response to hatred is simply doing your job well and not letting anyone shake your confidence." A week after the incident, Officer Harrison received a commendation for his conduct. The ceremony was small but significant, attended by senior military officials and palace representatives. As he stood at attention, receiving praise for his exemplary behavior, Harrison remembered his first day in uniform and how far he'd come. His response had shown that the best traditions could embrace change while maintaining their core values. The incident became a case study in police and military training programs. Instructors used it to demonstrate the perfect balance of assertiveness and restraint. "Notice how he follows protocol exactly," they would point out, "but does so in a way that maintains everyone's dignity." The videos became teaching tools for handling confrontation with professional composure. Social media continued to celebrate Harrison's response. Artists created drawings and animations of the moment, each one gathering thousands of likes and shares. One particularly moving piece showed Harrison's reflection in the palace windows, standing tall while the world around him changed for the better. It became a symbol of progress and tradition working hand in hand. As summer turned to autumn, the incident's impact continued to ripple outward. Applications from minority candidates to join the Queen's Guard saw a noticeable increase. Young people cited Harrison's example as their inspiration, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from grand gestures, but from one person doing their duty with unwavering dignity.